Hi everyone, this is Trisha, and I'm back again today with another watercolor video for you. Today I'm going to be showing you how to create this Mother's Day wreath. I actually filmed this back in 2018 and never uploaded it, so I thought I would do the voiceover and get it out to you with Mother's Day coming up very shortly. So to start off, I used a circle die and I lightly traced an area just for me to have a guideline. So I got rid of the top and the bottom because this is going to be sort of an open wreath. And I'm going to use this clear stamp from Gina Designs. This is part of Melanie Munchinger's Holiday Frame Fillers stamp set. And I just really love this little bow. It's really cute. And I'm inking it up with some yellow. And I want to make sure it's a clear stamp, so I want to make sure I ink it up really well. And I'm going to stamp it down at the bottom of this wreath. So I want to make sure I get some nice even pressure. So as you see, I'm stamping it down, and then I put my brush in water, and I'm now just like always, we're just going to pull some of that color out of the lines. So I'm trying to pull out the color where it's going to be the darkest, so that we get some nice shadows, and this will help create a three-dimensional look. So I'm just going around now and just pulling some of that color out. It's going to be really dark in those creases, as well as these little, I don't know what you call them, I'm going to call them bow, just the little ribbons that come out of the bow after you tie it. And then I'll pull the color from the left and the right side. Making sure that I maintain that highlight in the middle. So I've created a mask because I want to protect my bow from the stamping that I'm going to do. So I stamped it on a piece of Post-it note, and then I just cut it out. And I'm just making sure that it's secure on there, and I'm going to start stamping in my flowers. So this flower is from the original flower set. It's a daisy bunch, and it's a rather big stamp. So I'm just going to ink up a few of those blooms on the right side there. I inked it up with a purple, and then I stamp it down in a circular motion as many times as I can before I ink it up again. As you'll notice, as we go through this wreath, I'm trying to keep it balanced, the left and the right side, so that it looks symmetrical. So I stamped those down. Now I'm going to take my brush, I'm going to dip it in water and pinch it off, and then I'm going to just start softening out those lines. Generally, I tend to do the light ones first and then move on to the darker. That way, I'm not pulling too much color into those light areas. And I'm just going around. I'm not paying too much attention to staying within that. I kind of go out of that little circle, pull some of that color out. And I'm not stabbing at the flowers, at the blooms. My hand is on my desk, and I'm just using the tip of my brush. It's not flat, but I'm not poking it with the tip. And I'm just softening out those lines. Now I'm going to move on. I'm going to ink up those blooms again, just those little ones on the right. And I'm going to start filling in the wreath on each side of the wreath. Now the reason that I'm doing the flowers first is sometimes I tend to get a little bit crazy with my greens. So if I put my flowers in first, then I can just work my foliage around those blooms, and I just get a better look. As you can see, it looked like I got a blob of water there. So I'm just taking that stamp and going back over that middle bloom because it looks like I think I dropped some water on it, which happens. It happens. You can always, nothing is not fixable, unfixable, not fixable. There's nothing that can't be fixed. So you get it, if you drop a big thing of water and it screws up your bloom, you can just wait for it to dry and then go back over it with your stamp. No big deal. And it's paper. It's not the end of the world if you really hate it at the end. I would encourage you, even if you do hate it as you're going, to just continue to the end. First of all, it's good practice. And second, you may surprise yourself at the end, something that you thought you hated. Like definitely, if I had to do this again, I'm not sure I would put that bloom right there in the center. But it was fine, and it ended up being okay. And it ended up looking just fine. So now I'm using this vine, and this vine is from the Foliage Set 3. There's a left and a right. And I'm just kind of putting it in on each side of each of the blooms, making sure that I'm not filling it in completely. You still want to keep your white space because your white space is what's going to give you that dimension. If you color it in and it's completely colored in, it's going to look flat. So I'm just jumping it around left and right a few times here and there. And then I'm going to start climbing up the sides. As you know, I noticed that I put these little leaves on these really tiny blocks. You see they're hanging out of the bottom. And that's just because I knew I was only going to use the top of the vine. So I wasn't really concerned with it all being on the block. And it worked out just fine. Although you can see here that I'm kind of looking at where the orientation is, and it's a little awkward. What I generally do when I watercolor not on camera is my paper is not taped down. I tape it down just merely for filming purposes because it's easier for me to edit if the paper doesn't move around. So usually if I'm just watercoloring, I won't tape my paper down, and instead of moving my stamp around, I'll move my paper around. That way my stamp's always in the same orientation. It just makes it easier. So now I'm continuing with this little right-hand stamp. I'm inking it up and then stamping it down a few times here and there. And then I'm going to go on with the other one, and I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to do it on the left side. And this little wreath, I really like how it came out. It's really a fun project, and it doesn't take that much time at all. I would also encourage you, just use your stamps that you have. You don't need to use the exact stamps I'm using. If you have a different vine, it will work just fine for this, and the same with your flowers. Use what you have, experiment. It's paper. I really encourage you to really take advantage of just the practice. The more you do this, the better you get. So I did this in 2018. I might try to recreate this again and see how it comes out and see how much I've changed from, I think I did this in May of 2018. So it's been a year. So I wonder how much I've grown, because I do watercolor almost every day. It's something that I use as a relaxation, and I love to watercolor, and I love to make cards with watercolor on them. So now I'm just putting a few leaves just underneath that bow so that it looks like the bow's in the middle of the wreath and it's not just hanging off the bottom. I really wanted it to look like it was hanging, it was inside of the wreath. And now that I've stamped everything, I'm just going to come in here and I'm just going to touch each one of these little leaves, not caring if I hit every single one. I'm just kind of jumping my brush around and softening out those lines. I think I'm using a pine green from Marvy on this wreath. Now, we're in 2019, so right now we're using Tombows. Art impression has changed from Marvy's over to Tombow's. In Bonnie's videos, you'll see that she's using the Tombow markers. My videos now, I include the Tombow markers only because Art impression was having a hard time getting the Marvy's, so they've switched over to Tombow's, and I personally like them both, but I do like the selection I get in the Tombows. I do have the big set. I bought the big set a long time ago, and it's nice to be able to pull them out and use them. So you'll notice in my videos now that I always use the Tombows. I'm just continuing to go around and I'm pulling that color out of the lines. And I'm not trying to be too careful. I'm pulling some additional color out into the middle. I'm just jumping my brush around. We want this to look like a watercolor painting, not just stamping. So as I'm pulling the color out, you'll notice I go outside of those lines just to make it a little more full. If I think it needs a little bit more leaves here and there, I'll just use my brush to create those additional leaves. So now I'm going to try to use my fingernail and pull up that bow, that mask on the bow, and you see how it just pops. Yellow and purple are complementary colors on the color wheel, so when you put them together, they just stand out a lot more. Now I'm using the fine tip of my sepia marker. This is a brown, and I know I'm going over a brown with a yellow, but yellow has a hard time. It's hard to get a lot of depth with a yellow because it's such a light color, and the brown just helps with those shadows and really makes it's really nice when you're using yellow to use a brown as a darkening agent, I guess. And then I'm just coming in with my brush and I'm just softening that out where I kind of drew in those highlights. And it's just going to add a little bit more dimension to that bow. Still maintaining that highlight. Now I'm going to use the WC Flower Set 2. There's it looks like a vine. It looks like a viney flower. And I'm just going to ink it up with that same purple. As you can see, I only used 3 colors. I wanted to keep it very simple. And I'm just jumping it here and there, wherever I think it needs a little bit of accent. And again, I'm just using the tip of that flower, so I put it on a really small block that it's hanging off. Now I thought that my little daisy bunches needed a little bit more color, so I'm just inking them back up and stamping them a couple of times so that I get more dark areas. And then I'll come in and I'll just soften those out again. So don't be afraid to do that if you think they're too light or you don't have enough dark. Just ink it back up and stamp it right on over the top. So you wouldn't even be able to tell that there was a big water blob there. I don't think anyway. So now I'm just coming in and I'm just touching those blooms real quickly. There's not a lot of water on my brush at all because I want to maintain the integrity of that image, and if I use too much water, it will just blur it right out. So I'm just going in and touching a couple of those little blooms just to soften them. As you see, when you touch them with water, they really darken up and they really pop. Okay, so now I'm using some Gina K Designs green ink, and I'm using this stamp. I'm not really sure. I bought this stamp a long time ago. I really like it. I'm not sure who makes it, but I'm going to ink that up, and then I'm going to put it right in the middle of that wreath. And make sure I really get a good impression of it. And now I'm just signing and dating it. And that's it. That's the whole project. So thank you so much for stopping by, and thank you so much to everyone who subscribes. I really, really appreciate you, and I hope you all have a great day.